Hi folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about Ironman Western Australia, my Triple Crown, and what's next for Sarah Crowley in 2023. So Ironman Western Australia was my last race for the season. It was a long season, but we had planned to do Ironman Western Australia fairly early in the year. After Kona, we typically make the call as to whether it's worth going on for an extra few weeks. And this was probably the longest gap between Kona and my final Ironman that I've ever had to do. It was 8 weeks. Usually in the past, I've done a race early November, mid-November, like Arizona, Argentina and things. So there are a few differences that I wasn't expecting that happened with that extra few weeks, I think. But yeah, I guess we were used to it. I felt pretty good after Kona. I remember talking about that in one of my previous videos. There was still a bit of unfinished business because of a few things that went on in that race. And so yeah, I was committed to it pretty much as soon as we'd started some recovery. I guess the expectation was that I would still return and train at a fairly high level. Often that's a hard thing to do. So immediately after the World Championship, you often have a lot of motivation, but the true truth of that comes out. The truth of that comes out when you actually have to do the long rides and everything else. So it was a little bit different. I mean, we had to recover from Kona. I had to do a little bit of travel. We came back from the United States. We went to California, did a canyon ride, and a few other commitments. And so it was a few weeks before I actually started training again. And so we started off a little slower than normal just to see if things were okay. And then we hit it really quite hard at about week 4 after Kona with a massive block. I would probably say that week was almost the equivalent of my biggest week all year, which is a little shock to the system. Which meant as well that when I went down to Ironman 70.3 New Zealand, I was probably Ironman 70.3 Melbourne, sorry. It was a little bit, I was a little overcooked leading into that race, but we needed to do it as a brick before 3 weeks out, before Busso, just so that we could, you know, have that kind of hard effort, make sure that the mind was all back in, and we kind of knew that we were still at the training level and volume. Yeah, and then we came back and we did another couple more strong, hard weeks that were right up there with like the sort of pre-Hawaii weeks. So we definitely didn't, you know, just kind of hang out for this race. We actually planned for it. We trained into it, and you know, it was a really committed effort. And I think that's important now with the level of racing, is that you can't go half cut into or half baked into a race. And that actually is what kind of happened in Melbourne. It's like, for me, I was sort of, I'm fit, but we'd only be back training 2 or 3 weeks in Australia. And yeah, when you're racing people that are 70.3 fit, it's a different story for an Ironman fit athlete, and you have to be more specific. And so yeah, but I knew after that race that if I just carried on what I'd done, it was going to put me in a really good position for Ironman training and where we'd land in WA. So yeah, and then we had the usual taper, and it was pretty nice to feel the taper again. So it meant that we actually had done some training, and yeah, and it was good. We had everyone back on deck for the last few weeks before we left to go over to WA. And yeah, and then I guess it was the usual preparation in the last sort of week, and we flew over there for what was going to be a crack at all 3 Aussie races. So I guess the race review from Western Australia, we arrived the usual time for a local race. We kind of came in. Well, we actually were a little bit more strategic. Normally we fly Wednesday. We actually flew Tuesday afternoon because it's a late flight leaving Brisbane, and so it meant that we arrived into Perth quite late. So we decided to fly on the Tuesday, sleep the night in Perth, and then drive down to Busselton the morning of the next day after we'd done a swim, which meant it just sort of split the travel up. You could of course arrive and drive straight down, but I think, you know, there's no need for that. So we sort of broke it up a little bit. It was a really hot day when we arrived in Perth, and I was expecting the race day to be hot, but you never know at the moment with the weather. And when we got down there, the weather dropped quite quickly, and we had sort of cooler days leading into the race. We didn't have a lot of commitments. It was a pretty smooth week. Checked out the course, had a little look at some of the local scenery. It's a very stunning part of the world. So if you do ever get the chance to go to Busselton, I really recommend having a few extra days to go see some of the beaches. It's very quiet, super beautiful, got a country town feel, and very untouched. So totally beautiful place. And we did our usual race week lead in. I was super nervous for some reason. I think I'd put myself under a bit of pressure because obviously, nerves are always a good thing. It means you care, but I also feel that I really wanted to take all 3 races, but I knew that everyone going there was aiming for Kona qualification. There was quite a lot on the line, and everyone was at different parts of their season. Like I was finishing mine, other athletes were building into their fitness, and some people we just didn't know what to expect. Lottie had her first iron distance race, and you always know with someone like her, she's going to swim off the front, so who knows how that will change the race. So there are a few unknowns which made me a little bit nervous, but I knew that with the training that we'd done and the level I was at before Hawaii, that I would have a very strong race. And yeah, I guess you just have to center yourself back on your experience and everything you know before an event, just to kind of like calm down. But I definitely was nervous. I guess race day rolled around as it does, and the weather was very strange. I remember being interviewed before the race for the pro briefing and a pro panel, and we talked about what we'd like on race day. And because the course is very flat in WA, I really wanted a windy day to make it really even and fair. If there was going to be a battle on the run, I wanted it to be between people that had an equal amount of fatigue in the legs from the bike. So I was lucky on race day. It turned out the way I liked it. It was super windy. We got out in the swim, and obviously Lottie swam off, and these girls, they start like bullet a gate, and I was just trying to like hold on to Radka's feet, but Radka was also chasing Lottie, so the pace was on really early. And in fact, there is some footage of me under the Busso bridge where I've actually been dropped a bit by Radka. Thankfully the water in Busselton is like uber clear, and I didn't really have to sight. I could see her bubbles, so I just chased them hard, and eventually I got back onto Radka. And that's how the swim stayed, basically. We sort of broke apart from the rest of the group. Lottie was off the front. I was surprised she wasn't that far ahead. By the time we got through transition, it was only a couple of minutes. And so I just kind of consolidated myself and got myself in check, settled in for the big day, checked out the wind. I ran a 60 mil, sort of a 454, zip 454 front, which I think was the right decision on the day because there was a lot of crosswind, but I ran the disc on the back. Usually the back's not a problem in the wind. And yeah, so Radka was we were together, but she kind of got a little bit of a lead out of transition. I noticed she was kind of struggling with the wind squalls and the angles of the wind and the yaw, so I was able to like pass her pretty easy. And I just put like the gas down and sort of got away because she was like a little unstable in the wind. Thankfully my setup is really good and I feel super comfortable. And then it was settling in because I didn't really feel like I needed to catch Lottie like straight away, so I just sort of rode up over time. Eventually got there, did a big effort and dropped Lottie, and then just sort of made sure that I was making distance, not so much on those girls, but some of the others in the back where I knew that would come through in the run. So you've got sort of, Els Vizza, who's going to run through, I thought. And so I tried to make sure that gap was at something that I could conserve on the run. I actually was a little hungry at the back end of the ride, and I think it's because it was so windy that I was a little nervous about replacing bottles and getting food through the aid station. So I go with a setup of 3 bottles, which holds me out for quite a while. I obviously switched out bottles a few times, but didn't just grab multiple items per aid station. I think it's because it was so wobbly. I had my knees into the top tube to try and make sure the bike stayed steady. So it was very dodgy, the wind, but I don't think, I think if you have the right setup, it's fine, but it still feels a little unsafe. But you know, I came back into transition. I was a little bit hungry, so I didn't really push the last 10K of the bike like I normally would. I just didn't want to make sure. I sort of want to make sure that I didn't have like a hunger bunk or something weird. But in transition, I got through that. I was a little slower. I just want to make sure I had my shoes on nice and that I didn't have any hot spots on the feet. I took my time and sort of compose myself. I always eat and drink quite a lot in the first hour of the run, and I knew I had a 7-minute lead out of transition or thereabouts, so I had the time to make sure of that. But I did see there was a bit of a race going on behind me, which means you can't completely switch off, but yeah, you had to still maintain that composure and, you know, and follow through on the process that we've trained for. And yeah, I was pretty stoked. Like after about the half marathon, I mean, the support on course, by the way, at Bothelston is like unreal. There's a section where it's like a meter or so of like path, and there's just people that's all the way up and down it. So that was always like good. And also the run course is 4 laps, so you could head north, east and west, you know, maybe like 2Ks one way and like 3Ks the other way, so you're constantly coming back and forth through the crowd, so that keeps you going as well. Like I think with that sort of momentum, with the gap, with the ability to remain calm and patient and not be under the race pressure, it made for a really enjoyable day for me. Having said that, I don't feel like I really woke up from my trance of racing until there was like 2Ks to go in the run. And yeah, so the second half of the marathon, we all slowed down, but it's how much you slow down equally kind of thing. And I didn't feel the need to really push the last couple of laps, because it is the end of the year and we just want to make sure it happens. We've got to take a break, and I don't want to spend that time rehabbing something or just being exhausted. So we kind of just made sure of it. And yeah, and then 2Ks to go, it became really clear that it was impossible to be caught. And so then I finally woke up from this like trance of trying to just drive this race and enjoyed the experience. And
Still putting up 2022 GWM Ironman Western Australia Champion, folks. Make some noise for the amazing Sarah Crowley. Come on, Sarah, make some noise for your 2022 champion, Sarah Crowley.
yeah, I think for most of the year you're sort of pushing the whole time, but for this it was like, it really made the end of the season like so fun, because I got to enjoy that last little section with the crowd. And honestly, I couldn't believe it. It's sort of on paper now, I look back and you go, oh, okay, I did it, it can be done. But when you say at the start of the year to try and win all 3 Australian Ironmans in one year, you probably don't think you can do it. So I was pretty stoked. And happy to come away as well with Kona qualification for next year. So I guess one thing that came out of the race as well is that now I've won all 3 Ironmans in Australia in 1 year, which was never something we set out to do. We just started with one race, and then we did Cairns. We started with Port Mac because I needed to do a race. We went to Cairns because I love Cairns and I wanted to have another crack at the Oceania Championship. And then after that, we're like, well, hang on, why don't we look at WA at the end of the year? It's a good timing. It's like, I don't have to fly all the way to America. I don't have to fly overseas. So, you know, it's a short trip. It's like, well, what does that mean? It means you would, if you could win it, you win all 3. And so, yeah, I guess as it got closer, it was like, actually, this could be a really cool thing to do. And yeah, like I said, I don't think you think it's something you can do until you do it, then it's doable. And so I think that's the same for anything. You see sub 7, sub 8 this year, and it's like, well, can it happen? And then once it's done, it's like, it's doable, but before you do it, you don't think you can. So yeah, I'm totally stoked on it. It gives me some sort of a legacy, I guess. It's my home country. It's where I love racing the most. It's where I've spent so much of my career racing and helping and trying to give back to tri clubs and other athletes in Australia. So for me, it's something that means a lot. And yeah, I think it probably sets me out as being an Australian athlete that's done it. I think is the coolest thing, you know. So yeah, I'm really pleased. I'm so happy that we were able to do it because of all the sacrifice the team has made over the year. It gives something back to my coach and my team for all the hard work as well. So, and on a double positive note, it's like we've got Kona qualification in the bag for next year, and it just takes that bit of pressure off leading into next season.
In a time of 8:46.09 from Australia, Sarah Crowley.
So what's next for Sarah Crowley? We have finally some time off. It's been a hectic year. I got back to Australia in December last year, about this time, and then back into Queensland just on Christmas, back to squad training early January, and I was a mess. I wasn't at the level. We had to work uber hard to get back to the level to win Ironman Port Macquarie in May. And so this year we've got a better starting position for next season. So the goal for me over the next 4 weeks is to actually recover and relax, get the body back to where it needs to be to start the season. So making sure that everything's working right and getting, you know, massages and everything's body serviced before we start again. We'll probably do some easier stuff just over the Christmas period, and then the squad will return, and we do general training for a few months, and then it will become more specific around what I'm going to do after that. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next year. I don't know if I'll be doing the same racing pattern that I've done this year, but I do know that we're probably going to start a little later and not come out guns blazing just as soon, because there's a thing of longevity in the sport, and if you can keep riding the high while you're there, but at some point it can come crashing down. So we do need to give the body that chance to kind of recover so that we can build up again, and then find the next purple batch. So yeah, look, I'm looking forward to focusing my efforts around Kona, and probably now I've got the opportunity to train more specifically for the shorter PTO races. I think I didn't really have that opportunity this year, because if you're an Ironman focused athlete, you don't do the same training that you need to be fast for the shorter stuff. And so I'm pretty excited to be able to do that. I know there's probably some more PTO races to come, so yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And then maybe a European race next year as well, so we'll see. But yeah, for now it's recovery, and then some time with my family, some time at home, and some more sleep and less training, and some more fun over Christmas, and then back into it next year. So thanks for watching, thanks for supporting me in 2022. I really am grateful, because it's not an easy job what I do. I'm really keen to hear your comments on anything around my racing, any specific comments around racing, any of the races I've done this year, or general questions around racing or any of my equipment. Give me a follow, and stay tuned for our next video.
How did you really feel across the finish line?
So relieved, oh my God, so relieved. I actually couldn't believe it. I was like, I noticed afterwards, I was like holding my mouth. It's so really weird. I don't usually get emotional, but I was like properly stoked. Yeah, that's a pretty good achievement this year, I guess. Yeah.